All right. Real quick here, wanted to touch base on what may become the next project. So as I've spoken before, I want to diverge into kind of two directions on the server and the main rig, where right now the main computer kind of serves one and all functions to where it really is the jack of all trades, master of none. It is a very powerful computer, has served me very, very well, but for what I want to do, it is too broad of a device. I need a more specialized approach to better suit my needs. So, and what I'm trying to drive at is specifically single threaded applications. And those would be, Lightroom and gaming, just general tasks are very, very single threaded and don't play very well with the high core count, high thread count CPUs. And to that end, I think I will diverge into two separate categories. The first one being, kind of and it will be a very easy off the shelf build for a kind of gaming rig, which again is fairly straightforward. There's nothing really complicated or interesting about those. And then the other one would be a render server. And the render server would be able to crunch large amounts of data, support the 8K raw footage that I'm importing, and, kind of be that backbone of the um, video editing, photo editing, those types of big batch files for like image composite editor or Helion Focus, to where you need just tons of RAM, tons of processing power, and in that scenario, we would be able to take those resources and put them specifically on that task that makes the most sense for them. So, to that end, I have found, and let's switch over to this guy here. Really wasn't on my radar. Again, just kind of doing some browsing online and found this gem. And what it is an HP proliant Gen 9, and that's a very important factor there. The Gen 9 um, server, and what this guy does, and it's a 4U chassis, and what's really special about it is that it has not one or two CPUs, but four CPUs. And so it supports an insane amount of processing power despite being very old. When I say very old, I mean technology-wise very old. This is will be the Xeon 8000 series V4, which was launched quite a while ago. This is before Intel Scalable and all of that good stuff. So, um, 2 sockets ago, but still reasonably powerful in today's standards, especially because you get the multi CPU approach. And that will allow for nearly the same thread count as my 256 terabyte project, but at even less cost. Now, the downside to it, of course, nothing's free, is that it is very power hungry. Um, because it's an older process node, because it's older CPUs, because there are so many of them, it inherently pulls more power to do those tasks. So if you put it head to head with the Threadripper system, it's going to come out, you know, in the same ballpark as my current rig, but would use more power to do those same tasks. The flip side is that it accepts a metric ton of RAM. And the configuration that I'm looking at, the RAM constitutes the majority of the price for the computer. The shell itself, with the processors and everything, is somewhere like $400. It's unbelievably inexpensive. Um, Whereas the RAM, because I'm going to need, in order to properly populate the channels, if we use 32 gig DIMMs, it works out to be a terabyte of memory. And that particular point is just mind blowing to me. Absolutely mind blowing that I would even be considering something with that amount of RAM is just. Again, I've said this before, but when I built this computer, and I was really pushing the limits at the time, and I went with 128 gigs of RAM, and it cost a fortune. And now I'm looking at a terabyte of RAM for a fraction of that price. And again, just mind blowing. But yeah, so each of these CPUs is a quad channel memory controller and would support, it actually supports more RAM than this. The exact way that they get to the total number of slots, I'm not entirely sure, because it is a quad channel system, but each processor can address 12 sticks of RAM, which doesn't add up right. So again, I'm not entirely sure how they get to that number. I'll need to do some more digging and figure that out, because it is a genuinely interesting subject. But so if we go with the minimum memory requirements to hit the quad channel part, we're talking about 32 gig DIMMs, which again works out to be a terabyte of memory. You could look at doing 16 gig DIMMs, but the cost difference is negligible. And so I genuinely don't have any applications that can use that much RAM. But again, for the $20 difference in between the two configurations, right? Why not go for the, terabyte? It's just, again, why not? So, and the other part about this system, if we flip it around to the back here, is that it also supports GPUs. And so, I don't think I've got a good picture of the inside of this case. But you've got a bunch of slots here, and they're all, again, the benefit of having this many CPUs is they're all wired up for X16 PCIe slots. So you get the full bandwidth on all the slots. And then the other one is that it has the power connectors to actually run the GPUs. And so in the current server that I've got, one of the biggest issues is that while the case is fantastic, supports all the drives that I want, does everything that it should do, the backplane does not support adding any GPUs. It only supports CPU power. So that is a limitation for the current server and was something that I was looking to get around. And so I was looking at GPU servers and a bunch of things like that, and eventually stumbled upon this one. And this guy just makes so much sense. It is, again, just mind blowing to me that this is available for pennies on the dollar. Again, this in its base bone configuration that they've got here is, again, like $280. It is, uh, I can't wrap my mind around it. When these servers were originally commissioned, the CPUs alone were like 6 to 8 grand a piece just for the CPUs. And then you're talking about 3 terabytes of memory. This was easily a $30,000 to $40,000 system back in the day, and now it is being sold off as e-waste for $280. Again, just I can't wrap my head around that type of stepping stone. That this was the backbone of big enterprise, big data stuff back in the day, and now is the plaything of yesteryear. So yeah, just kind of wanted to say that this is out here as a possibility. It will require some serious thought as to how I'm going to make this happen. The problem with being a bare bones system like this, where there's no guts to it, is that like the rack rails, they're not like the Supermicro server. You can say a lot of things about Supermicro, but one of the key pieces for Supermicro's infrastructure over the years is that they have maintained their product stack over the years with very minor tweaks into their componentry. So what that means is you can buy rack rails, and I'm going to harp on rack rails very specifically here, for a Supermicro server from 12 years ago or this year, and they're the same rack rails. They plug in the same, they work the same, everything is compatible. The same with the hard drive sleds. Now, the hard drive sleds are not perfect, but they're compatible. They don't have any issues with plugging in to an old system or a new system. They just work. Whereas HP and Dell, on the other hand, whenever they refresh, they completely gut the product line and start over again, it feels like. And so the rack rails are not compatible, the hard drive sleds are not compatible, fans are not compatible, nothing is swappable. So the most you got was Gen 8 to Gen 9 in recent terms, where those were pretty much the same chassis, pretty much the same server. But, for Gen 9 to Gen 10 or Gen 10 to 11, those parts are not compatible. And so you're really stuck where these are kind of one and done systems, and is part of the reason that they don't hold their value in the aftermarket world, is that it's so specific to the components of that era that you really can't, there's not an upgrade path to this stuff. So you kind of have to gut it and start over again. And I'm being very generic here, but that's the one of the problems that comes with these. And Supermicro has made a name for themselves by both positively and negatively by maintaining these standards that they've had for as long as they have. you don't get the newest, latest, greatest um, stuff this way, but you also maintain amazing compatibility to the older systems. Power supplies would be another one. They've used the same uh, finger pinout for their power supplies for years, and it just works. You can plug in a power supply from several years ago or this year, and they just work. It's incredible. Whereas these guys, they have all kinds of bells and whistles with their power supplies. I don't know if I can show this. No, it doesn't. I'm not even going to pull it up. There are fingers on the power connectors that are specific to if you have the full HP infrastructure all the way through, you can get even more data out of your power supplies and infrastructure that's, all of the PDUs and everything if you have the HP infrastructure end to end. Again, that's great and all, but it ties you into that infrastructure, and you have to have that or you miss out on those components. If you're like me, I don't. It would be cool, but it's not something that I have to make it work. So it's going to be a hard pass. And then the other one. So in talking all of this server stuff, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is the power supply conundrum. So as I talked about before, I changed out the breaker from a 15 to a 20 amp in order to support the air conditioning unit and the current server and just everything that I'm doing right now. And that works for what I've got currently. But if I were to slap this computer in there and really push it, um, I don't think that's going to cover it. So I'm exploring other options, and one of them would be to go to 220 or 240, whichever way you want to say it. And the reason being is that, well, there are several reasons, but the biggest one is by doubling the voltage, you can half the amperage. And so that gives you a ton more playroom to go with, and it carries with it additional efficiency bonuses. So you get, for power supplies, they're rated for either 110 or 220 as far as their input current goes, input voltage goes. And depending on which one of those you do, you can get different power outputs out of these supplies. So I'm just going to pull random numbers here. These are not indicative of actual numbers, but it would be like if you had a 1600-watt power supply on 110. If you supplied that with 220, you could get a 1800-watt power supply out of that. Again, gross simplification there, but kind of what you can do with those power supplies because you get a little bit more efficiency by moving the voltage up. And so, in addition to the efficiency bonus, you also gain a very large increase in total amperage that can be supplied. And all of that to say, this guy has 4 1600-watt power supplies in there. And if we do the numbers real quick, yeah, that is 6,400 watts. And if we do, I'm doing it wrong. We gotta do backwards. Divided by 20. Yeah, I'm doing something wrong with the math there. Um, that'd be 5 amps. That doesn't sound right. Anyway, um, it is a significant amount of power, a very, very large amount of power. Um, so long and short of that is the when you start adding all of these components up and you hit the numbers that we're talking about, again, it wouldn't be sustained loads, but burst loads could easily trip the 20 amp breaker, especially because in load configurations, I'm going to need to run the AC unit to be able to help offset the heat that's coming out of the components. So, you know, if you hotboxed it and turn the AC off, I could probably get away with it. But if I turn the AC on, that guy can pull 12-ish amps by itself. It just doesn't leave a lot of playroom for other components. Again, I'm taking kind of a long, windy road to get here, but the the main issue that I'm running into right now is not every component that I have supports the 220, 240 volt, the over 200 volt range. So I would have to very carefully set that up. And also the computer room and the guest bedroom share the same power circuit. So I would also have to be very cognizant of, somebody coming in and plugging their most phone adapters and stuff support the wide range of voltages, but it would be very unfortunate for somebody to plug something in and just cook it because it's on the wrong voltage scale. So that is something I'm very cognizant of is if I were to shift it, I would have to um, probably put little stickers over all of the outlets to say, hey, by the way, this is not your standard 110 to 120 outlet. And I would still have to either do a step down transformer or some other way of getting the um, power down to the devices that can't accept the higher voltage. Specifically, the current PDU that I have can't support the higher voltage. The amplifiers don't support the higher voltage. Um, I'm pretty sure the air conditioner doesn't support the higher voltage, which I find kind of weird, but yeah, whatever. Um, but the big ones are the computers. The computers all support the higher voltage. So even the main computer here supports the higher voltage range, no problem. Um, Power supplies for computers have for quite a while been pretty universally compatible with the various voltage ranges. So in that regard, that would go pretty seamlessly. Again, like I mentioned before, the phone adapters and those types of things generally support a pretty broad range of voltages. Most of my networking gear would support the broader range of networking with broader range of voltages. Um, so yeah, it's just kind of a very select few components, but enough for me to have to really think about it and figure out if that's what I want to do. Um, and then there's the part of actually doing it. I'm not sure if that's a DIY project or something I would actually have to get an electrician in and look at. Um, Switching the breaker out was pretty easy, but redoing for a dual pole system again should be pretty straightforward, but I'm not as confident on that. So it's not as clean as just unplugging what was there and plugging it back in. It would be making sure that I've got, the hot colds right. I've got all of that stuff taken care of. I would probably have to move all of the um, breakers down one to accommodate the two pole system instead of the single pole system. So again, I'm not sure if that's something I can do or something I would need additional help with. So, but all that to say, this is kind of a interesting project. It is obtainable and something that I think I'm gonna start working with. Still ironing out the last of the details as far as the seller goes. Just making sure that everything is accounted for and talked about. Again, with these used systems, you have to be very particular and make sure that there's not something overlooked or excluded from what you think you're getting versus what they're providing. Um, Again, price is right for sure, but it pays to make sure that you've done your due diligence to ensure that all of the components that you're anticipating getting are what you're actually receiving. So, again, an interesting project. Could take off, could not. We'll see, but more than likely we're gonna move on this one, and it will be a interesting beginning to the next phase, which is bringing forward that render based computer and getting that set up. So really looking forward to this and seeing what we can do.